In this episode, I am joined by Dr. Ian Wickramasekera and Julia Shannon. Dr. Ian Wickramasekera is a Bön Buddhist practitioner and Associate Professor of Mindfulness-Based Transpersonal Counselling at Naropa University. Julia Shannon is completing a master's degree in Clinical Mental Health Counselling and a course in Sowa Rigpa Counselling, in which she is researching the intersection of hypnosis, Buddhist meditation, and mental health. In the first part of this interview, Dr. Ian discusses his current thinking on what the traditions of Dzogchen and Western hypnosis can learn from each other, challenges Herbert Benson's relaxation response theory of meditation, and questions dualistic frameworks in science and experimental psychology. Then Dr. Ian and Julia dialogue about the prevalence of mental illness and regressive coping in Buddhist meditators, the personality types of religious mystics, and Julia's own experience using hypnosis to cure her phone addiction. Dr. Ian and Julia also consider the implications of teaching advanced Buddhist meditation methods in a clinical setting, including ethical issues and concerns about violating sacred Samaya vows, and they discuss their experiences of personal identity and professional life as biracial adults in America today. So without further ado, Dr. Ian Wickramasekera and Julia Shannon. Dr. Ian Wickramasekera and Julia Shannon, welcome to the podcast. Well, I'm so delighted to be talking with you both here today. And Julia is currently finishing a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling and also finishing a Buddhist Sowa Rigpa, that's Tibetan medicine counseling course, and will soon be practicing psychotherapy in a clinical internship. And she's particularly interested in the ways in which hypnosis and therapy, particularly from her perspective of Buddhist therapy, can support each other. And she's writing a thesis about that. I'll let her explain more about that in depth later. And of course, in this episode, Dr. Ian, you've generously agreed to talk with Julia about her thesis and answer some of her questions. So thank you very much, Dr. Ian, and also thank you, Julia.
So happy to be with you. Thank you.
And first of all, I'm going to ask a couple of questions to you, Dr. Ian, just some introductory questions, and then I'll step back and the two of you will carry on with your dialogue. So, of course, this, Dr. Ian, is right in your wheelhouse, this sort of material we're thinking about here. I'm thinking in particular of your papers, the Kalyana Mitra and the Client-Centered Psychotherapist, that was 2004.
Yeah.
And hypnotic-like aspects of the Tibetan tradition of Dzogchen meditation, 2020.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We've discussed those papers before, you and I, in many episodes here on the podcast, and I do strongly recommend anyone listening or watching to go back and check out those previous episodes with Dr. Ian. They've been very fascinating, very popular episodes. So if I might quote the latter, the hypnotic-like aspects of the Tibetan tradition of Dzogchen meditation, I'll just quote a little bit from that. The tradition of hypnosis offers the yogis of Dzogchen an example of how they could benefit by opening up their methods and theories of mind to scientific inquiry, which in fact many teachers of Dzogchen are already espousing today. The research tradition of hypnosis can offer Dzogchenpas excellent empirical evidence for their assertion of the dreamlike nature of the self and reality, as well as empirical methods of investigating the phenomena of Dzogchen. For instance, Dzogchenpas might be interested in researching whether the practice of Ngondro increases the mind-body potential of yogis in similar ways that research in hypnosis has shown that a number of practices can increase hypnotic ability. The yogis of Dzogchen can offer the clinical and experimental traditions of hypnosis entirely new hypnotic-like practices and theories of mind to research such as Trekcho and Togyal. The study of these practices might help expand the potential domain of hypnosis and our understanding of what Dzogchen asserts about the natural state of the mind. And there are some more examples here. For instance, we might wonder about how the yogi's visual experience of Tigle in the Togyal practice of sky gazing is similar to and or different from visual hypnotic hallucinations. How are the neurophenomenological correlates of yogis meditating on the natural state of the mind similar to people's experiences in hypnosis contacting the wisdom of their unconscious? Is the deep wisdom said to exist with the natural state and the unconscious mind actually less dualistic, as the tradition of Dzogchen asserts? The yogis of Dzogchen also challenge us to become more phenomenologically based in our personal embodiment of hypnosis, in a way that could inspire us to become better clinicians and researchers, capable of embracing the new neurophenomenological paradigm that is emerging in consciousness studies. So I've read that rather long quote from that article, and of course I will link the full paper in the show notes for those who wish to read the whole thing, and I recommend that you do. So, Dr. Ian, to establish some context, could you walk us through some of that material and also share with us your current thinking on the clinical possibilities in this meeting of hypnosis and Buddhist practices, such as those of the Dzogchen tradition?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And thank you for the wonderful introduction, Steve. And Julia, it's so nice to be with you here. And I really look forward to hearing about your work and have a nice discussion. This is such a powerful potential area, I think, for allowing some of the limitations of the Western practice of psychotherapy, counseling, and related fields, I guess psychiatry and neurology probably as well, um, to really get beyond some of the needless dualistic hang-ups, that we have this huge hang-ups in crisis in mental health. And this year in particular has really seen a number of gigantic paradigms in Western psychology and psychiatry in particular, really fallen apart, like the paradigm about how antidepressants work, which, for those who do hypnosis research, and even anyone who knows who Irving Kirsch is, has known for a long time that the neurospecificity of the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor theory of how depression is cured, and indeed the whole hypothesis that uh, mainly depression reflects serotonin deficiencies is just totally dismantled this year. And that's only one of several dualistic interpretations of the challenges that we face in this life with depression, and and the challenge to even just improve our performance in other areas, like being, I don't know, better golfers and better at doing our work. So whether we're thinking about trying to help people with the suffering of this life or to improve their performance, the whole paradigm that we have in Western psychology and counseling really suffers from this tremendous um, tendency to be completely dualistic in ways that it doesn't need to. And so when we really get into this area, I see this bright light of this non-dualistic practices, coming from many different traditions of indigenous wisdom, but in particular, I really like to talk about Dzogchen meditation. It's so good for helping one to realize the illusions of self that we persecute ourselves with all the time, whether we want to make that needlessly materialistic, and start to say, well, it must be this faulty default mode network in my brain that needs to be adjusted or something, or whether we want to really believe in the illusion of self in such a level that we just say we're stuck. For instance, I once had to quit smoking, and I told myself, I've been smoking since I was 12. I must be a smoker, and got real fixated on the continuity of this amazingly flexible self, and saying, no, I'm stuck. And yeah, even if you want, you can do that. So just off the bat, I wanted to say that the interaction of these two traditions, in particular hypnosis and Dzogchen, I think has tremendous benefits. And that quote, so kind of you to read, Steve, I think really focuses in on what the possibilities are for each side. Uh, and I guess maybe starting with the clinical psychology side of it, I really do feel there is a real crisis in science in general. This is not just a psychology issue about the materialistic viewpoint of science has been in question at the highest levels of physics for quite a while now. I mean, to such an extent where people are proposing experiments to see whether we're living in a simulation or not. Which the funny thing is, the answer to that question is, by definition, yes. And no one experiences the world outside of their somatosensory cortex. No one experiences the world outside of the neural matrix, anyways. The question is whether the experience of the somatosensory cortex and the experience of the matrix that we have is also simulated as well. Is it that we're experiencing a simulation within a simulation is the real question, because no one experiences their body directly. Only you have, the sensations that travel to the, neuromatrix area in the parietal cortex, and that is, in fact, a simulation of the body. No one experiences reality directly. And so this is a real crisis in science in general about needlessly making science only the province of a kind of materialistic dualism. And no doubt that non-dualistic philosophies do need to be integrated into all areas of science, even in physics. I mean, it's really amazing. You can read in many different crises in that field now, and particularly around non-locality, about how are we to understand and measure things when measuring them changes the state of the universe, in quantum mechanics. Um, but anyway, I'll keep this to psychology, but I did want to say that this actually is something that I feel belongs in all areas of science, not just psychology, but it must by its nature, because we're talking about people's subjective experiences in psychology. Like depression is a subjective experience. When you have it, you really have to deal with it as it is. And if someone tells you that your depression is solely because you're running out of serotonin and you just need more, why, that can kind of imprison you in a kind of view that, in fact, there's nothing you can do about it. The other thing that really sucks about that is it also tends to make you blame yourself when, in fact, maybe you're living in a kind of society that's exploiting and that actually uh, it turns out that a large number of people are taking drugs to increase their serotonin who are perhaps being exploited. And also that there may be, if the person is not being exploited, that the society itself is sick in a different way, not involving exploitation necessarily. Uh, but there can be all kinds of social and cultural uh, determinants that bring people to the experience of depression and suffering. And maybe, if we were to really follow Dzogchen even further, that actually there is something inherently causes one to suffer as long as you believe in yourself. This is a really funny way of saying that. And I do mean that paradoxically and playfully. But actually, there is a kind of existential level of suffering that we would understand in the Western way. We would call this existentialism by nature of existing. There is a kind of suffering that people experience. And maybe that has absolutely nothing to do with serotonin, or if it does, that it's, something more of multiple factors contributing to different people's mind-body interactions. So that, yeah, you could existentially have a tendency to feel anxiety over the fact that someday you're going to die and that you don't know what's happening from the next moment to the next. And some people like things about you and that feels good, and other people don't like many other things about you, or you worry that they think negative things about you. And the next thing you know, this whole maintaining the self becomes very difficult. I mean, there's just all manner of suffering that happens when one is born as a human being and fixates on who one thinks one is. And so one of the wonderful things that Dzogchen can really offer is a way of cutting through some of these fixations that cause these dualistic interpretations of why one is suffering, when in fact it is the holding itself. And the being attached to who I think I am is definitely the thing that's bringing me, and wanting to be a certain way is definitely, no doubt, my biggest source of suffering. Uh, is it also true that there are other things going on that contribute? Of course, yes. Definitely the kind of society I live in, and definitely those things accumulate in ways that influence my body that will also bring me into a line, an experience of suffering. It's really very hard not to be experiencing depression if you have no energy, no energy, and you're feeling like maybe in the Saloon practice that your central channel is blocked, and you cannot experience any of this non-dual energy that really allows one to let things be as they are. And like, yeah, there are things about myself I don't like. And there are many things that I cannot change about. It seems like I can't change about the world around me, whether it's simulation or not. But at the same time, it's okay. There is a way of letting things be as they are, leave things as they are without being too fixated and working with them as they are. And so that philosophy of Dzogchen really cuts across many traditions of clinical psychology. Even this phrase, like "leave it as it is," like this phrase I first heard actually in the tradition of hypnosis. I heard this from hmm, probably was Martin Orne, who is one of the inventors of the Harvard group scale of hypnotic ability. And also I heard from Ernest Hilgard at Stanford. And every time he would be inducing hypnosis, he would say, just let happen whatever happens. And just go with whatever is happening. And then later on, I'm studying Dzogchen, and I heard many times our most senior teacher in the Bön tradition of Dzogchen, his name is Yangzin Rinpoche. And so Yangzin Rinpoche, I believe he's about 95 now. And anytime you go to ask him a question, what should I do during my meditation? Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I be more focused on this? If I have this kind of experience, what should I do? And it would just always say the same thing. Leave it as it is. It is enough. Leave it as it is. And so, but then the question is, well, how do I leave? What am I, and who am I who's leaving as it is? But it's true, actually. It's the grasping and the focus on grasping. And part of that grasping is the dualism that we perceive. between the me and the not me, the self and the other, all these things. At any rate, I got quite a bit philosophical here at the beginning to start, but this is because actually I think dualism is an extremely limiting factor now for clinical psychology. Certainly, it has been a crisis for psychiatry, as I'm just sort of talking about psychiatry's problems with SSRIs. And it's not just that, like, we have pills that we don't know why they work. It's also that we're giving pills to people that don't work for them, and even that make them worse because we have a theory that says they need it. So there are people that get medications because of theories about dualistic theories about what underlies depression in particular, but also anxiety and even theories involving, various so-called extreme states or psychotic experiences. There are people who are being forced on those medications who actually get worse with them. And that is, it is only if you believe in these theories in such a tight way that you would do such a thing to a person. And no doubt, um, those medications do help some people, but they don't help everyone. And then even in the pharmaceutical manufacturer's own research shows that some people get worse. And so this is a real crisis. And so one of the biggest things I think philosophically we can get out of an interaction between Dzogchen and hypnosis and clinical psychology or psychiatry for that matter is to understand that we need to let loose some of our dualistic thinking about how the mind works. And I really enjoy this a lot, this interaction. Even I did one study there where I picked an easy, low-hanging fruit, which was to look at the so-called dualism of the autonomic nervous system, where it's divided between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. It was my great, I guess, non-dualistic trickster-like nature that I proposed to invalidate Herbert Benson's relaxation response theory. Because I realized that, his theory about meditation and also any relaxation-oriented practice was that we are able to experience relaxation because relaxation is hardwired as a parasympathetic response from the parasympathetic nervous system, and that if you wanted to really see a real relaxation response, you would see reduction in sympathetic nervous system, the so-called stress-based nervous system, and then you want to see the relaxation. Then as the stress is going down, then the relaxation goes up in the parasympathetic nervous system. And there were measures of these things, like a pure measure of sympathetic nervous system would be like skin conductance from amount you sweat, from the galvanic skin response of your fingertips. And then a good measure, materialistic measure of parasympathetic nervous system, really good one would be cardiac vagal tone. And you should be able to show good vagal tone response to show you're increasing, to be a good measure of your parasympathetic nervous system. And so for many years, people just let that go. But anybody who had ever done Kundalini yoga knew right away that was fucked up, because when you do Kundalini yoga, you can be super relaxed, and that really jacks your heart rate up. And you're not feeling stressed, you feel good. But also, anyone who'd ever made love should have realized that that was fucked up, because in order to make love, you have to hit the brakes and the gas at the same time. If you don't have enough sympathetic engagement, you cannot engage in enough heart rate increase, and all these things are normal during orgasm. In fact, during orgasm, most people's heart rate is approaching that, similar to a little less than having a heart attack. And yet nobody is saying that's so stressful they don't want to make love. Well, unless they have, actually a sexual dysfunction, and then they go to sex therapy, and then I see them. But it's not the stress response that's making it bad. Actually, it's this dualism, this thought that the autonomic nervous system itself. See that we keep doing that. We keep coming up with these opponent processes, and that there's no doubt that not only is this bad for our understanding of the neuroscience of the body, but it's just bad in general. That really we end up with these needless debates in science all the time between people trying to specify things in dualistic terms, when in fact there's really a lot of these things have a lot more fuzziness to them that it really needs to be. Like, we should not be calling the parasympathetic nervous system the relaxation-based nervous system. We should not be calling the stress-based nervous system the sympathetic system, because yeah, while there is a tendency in those directions, they're not essentially either one of those things, because it's very possible to have very stressful experiences when you show very little sympathetic activation. A good example of that would be like this kind of, I guess maybe like a catatonic psychotic state would be something like that, very low activation. And all the people I know that have been in catatonic states have said they are really frightening and horrible. Also, people having sleep paralysis could look very peaceful psychophysiologically. They'll have very low heart rate elevations and things, at least at the beginning stages of it. And the muscle tone of sleep paralysis is none. Like, they have no EMG whatsoever. They look like their body is the most relaxed ever. At any rate, I'm just trying to give some examples of this crazy dualism and how there are, I think, fundamental misunderstandings about how the body works altogether in relationship to even our emotions. It's very strange. Like, people think that if you were to say that you were happy, then that would mean that you couldn't be angry at the same time. I don't think that's true. It reminds me of a classic Ren and Stimpy episode where I remember, like, Stimpy or Ren says, "I'm happy being angry." There are times when you can be angry and happy at the same time. It's very interesting. I think that the more that we can get into really looking at the potentiality that human beings have through abandoning some of these dualistic ideas about the dualism of different mental processes. For instance, the relaxation versus stress-based nervous systems. I think we'll start to really see a lot of the shades of gray in between. And in particular, there is between that one is sexual experiences, right? Where there's high activation of both. And everyone experiences, at least I hope everyone gets a chance to experience such things and such bliss and intimacy with oneself and others. It's really very important, I think, that when people begin really to look at how the mind really is and what really brings a cessation of suffering, it is through letting things be as they are and not reifying them into categories or experiences of calling oneself by one name or calling any one thing by one name. And really allowing the context, the total context of everything that's happened to really come into the picture, rather than essentializing, which I think philosophically is one of these things. We even need our epistemology to change. So I guess that's going a little further than I did in the past on this. I happen to be writing about this right now. And I think actually Dzogchen does offer a different kind of epistemology that also includes, what is he? What is the philosophy that the truth can be beautiful? I always forget the name of that philosophy. Uh, Aestheticism. Yeah, we could also include aestheticism in particular, philosophically. I think, no doubt. How is it that we aren't including aestheticism in a science where we're trying to help people reach beautiful experiences? And yet, if you look at the writings in Dzogchen, they're always talking about beauty, and even have like iconography about it, about rainbows, things like that. Like actually, the truth is also beautiful and loving. There is an inseparability between truth of something and love. And so all of this, I think, really draws into question why we have taken aestheticism out of science. I would like to I would like to take the hard version of materialism out of science and bring some aestheticism. Um, anyway, so that's one very abstract area. I'm sorry I started with that one, but it's one I've been thinking quite a lot about because it's not just for psychology. I think it's actually for all the sciences. I think we need some aestheticism to bring some morality to science, actually. Um, but yeah, more specifically, no doubt, Dzogchen has all of these practices that uh, build upon many of the practices we've already studied, such as in particular mindfulness meditation. And I would say even now, there's been, more than a decade or two of research on compassion-based practices like Tonglen. But all of those practices, are fairly um, appropriate for introductory level folks to practice, for novices to practice. There are actually a number of practices also for novices that have hardly ever been studied, like Sa Lung. I was just practicing before I got here. That practice is actually meant to make mindfulness work better. In my tradition, Sa Lung means the energy and the channels. And so you do different breathing practices that are meant to activate different energy centers in your body. And in particular, in my tradition in the Bön, they teach this when you're first learning meditation, so that when you go down to sit, you're not sitting there with as much anxious energy. Like this actually gives a way of working with the body to change the mind, rather than always we want to, in psychology, we will teach you to change your mind mostly by changing your thought and teaching you how to change your thought. It's very rare that actually we spend some time talking about how to change the mind by changing the body, other than saying you should exercise and practice stress management. But there's very little thought about the interaction of mind and body in that. And so there are a whole number of practices for changing the mind using the body or the energy, really more, the experience of energy, that like Sa Lung would be in there, and Trokur, Tibetan yoga. Then also there are, as we discussed in other times, ways of actually experiencing the non-duality itself of our perception through using Trekcho and then later Togal, to sort of experience non-dual perceptions of the illusory nature of reality itself. Things that, frankly, we've been blowing the scientific world away for many years in the hypnosis world by showing that when people actually have hypnotic hallucinations, they have the same correlates as if they were looking at the real stimulus. There's quite a number of those experiments. Steve Coslin was the first that I'm aware of to show that hypnotic hallucinations in terms of positron emission tomography, though later people repeated with fMRI, you can't tell the difference between whether someone is visualizing something with a hypnotic hallucination or whether they're directly looking at an image. There is no difference, at least in terms of what we can measure. Maybe perhaps the better measures will come up with distinctions, is possible, of course. But at any rate, so with this tradition, really we'll have a way of really investigating, non-dualistic experiences directly with a real paradigm, with a Togal, and one which we could even say has a embodied tradition how to teach such a thing. And that's another thing that I think Dzogchen really has to offer the hypnosis world. And that is, too often, I met people who were like experts in hypnosis, and they really are. So I'm not meaning to question that. But then I would say to them, I was like, oh, what is your experience of hypnosis like? And they're like, oh, I've never been hypnotized. Remember, I told Ted Barber that one time. I was like, wow, because I saw him giving a lecture and it looked like he was deep in trance. And I was like, all right, Ted, man, you were really on fire, man. You were deep in your hypnosis there. I was like, what are you talking about, Ian? I've never been ever, you know. And then even my dad started to make fun of him a little bit. We were like, you closed your eyes the whole time. You were either preaching from a high hypnotic trance, no doubt. You were in your own way, then I was trying to relate it to my empathic theory of hypnosis, saying, yeah, you were so entranced with your own viewpoint that you were like hypnotized, a hypnotic-like state, so to speak. And actually, that often is what makes for a good speaker, someone who is so immersed in their own view that actually they can explicate it at a very deep level. And then if they're aware of their audience, it's so much better. Really aware of who they're speaking to and using the words that, yeah, sure, they're able to speak from their own place, but actually make contact with other people too. At any rate, I just find it atrocious that so many people in the hypnosis world do not devote themselves to hypnotic practice other than on other people. And I think this is insane. I think the way we should be teaching hypnosis is much more similar to the way the Dzogchenpas teach you. You must learn by practicing yourself before you ever become a teacher of another person. And I think there are so many people I know that I think that not only would they do better clinical work, but I think we would have less debates in the hypnotic world about things that don't really matter that much in the grand scheme of things. If people would actually just practice on a daily basis, and that it should be, from my viewpoint, a requirement of becoming a real expert in hypnosis is that you're practicing every day and not just on others. You have to go along for the ride with your clients at the bare minimum, but you should be practicing all by yourself as well, or doing something to work with that part of us that really allows these things to happen. Whether we think of that in a materialistic term of our default mode network or just experientially, we're doing something to work with our ability to transform our mind-body relationship. So maybe that's enough to be said on that side about what they offer us. I think simply what we offer them is a lot of validation of their ideas because, because we have been so dualistic, we actually have found ways to give correlates of neurological experiences. And so sometimes we actually have been able to do things that actually suggest that enlightenment exists materialistically. One is we showed that mind wandering in meditation, or the sort of tendency to talk to oneself, can be indexed by different things, but in particular activity of the default mode network. And so if you wanted to see someone who really can be fully in the here and now during any number of meditation related practices, whether they're thought of as Dzogchen or not, but in particular, maybe we'll say Trekcho here, just being in a state of open awareness. You can see people who are good at this practice. They do actually have less default mode network activity going on, which suggests that they're talking to themselves less. They're less self-aware in terms of generating and verbally clinging to oneself. Also, this is related to related mystical and hypnotic-like experiences like in ayahuasca, where the default mode network seems to dissolve altogether. People will experience something that you might call an ego death. At any rate, so that is definitely something that we can offer them, that actually some of these research paradigms in hypnosis could be used to research even the most precious of these teachings. And especially since that has started to happen, that seems to be what's happening. And so I think that's wonderful and may save this precious indigenous wisdom traditions that I think really could help us, not just in terms of thinking about social justice issues, but it could really help us with this huge problem, philosophical problem that I really went into in quite detail. And I'm sorry about the philosophical underpinning of science itself needing to be less materialistic and include more aestheticism. I think we really need a lot more aestheticism at least in psychology and psychiatry. Maybe physicists will tell me there's no use for aestheticism there, but I can say it has practical value in psychiatry because we care about the beautiful in psychiatry and psychology. We're trying to reach the beautiful. Why does our scientific method not include aestheticism? And it really doesn't make much sense anymore to me. It will make us more sensitive to the context in which beings live. Do people live in a beautiful way? Are you living in a society that does not allow inner human beauty to come out? Then maybe we should change. Maybe there are ways to do that. And Dzogchen does offer that, actually. It's very interesting. I'm actually happen to be sitting in a place where there was a Tibetan Rinpoche who proclaimed that such a thing was possible, that we could actually draw forth not only from individually or as a lineage of people practicing Dzogchen, but actually the principles of Dzogchen and different esoteric Buddhist ideas could be utilized in a kind of government, and those were the Shambhala teachings that Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche proclaimed. So possibly that could also come into play. That could be something we could contribute more to an understanding of how human beings could live in beauty, but at least at an individual. I mean, I have not studied those teachings in any depth, so I won't vouch, but I love very much that teacher. But I will say that individually, no doubt, and there's no doubt that people can come to really get beyond their grasping. And that seems to be the origin of so many categories of our suffering, come from clinging to the self or clinging to the world. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that benefit of Dzogchen be validated by the very same methods that we use, are similar methods to validate hypnotic techniques. Why not also do that here? We have all kinds of scales that we've invented that, or even the concept that people have of, for instance, what makes for a good student. In Dzogchen, there are all kinds of writings about the classifications of good students. Well, the hypnosis research would seem to suggest that being a high hypnotizable is one of them. Because for one thing, it would be very hard to do any Dzogchen practices if you're a low hypnotizable. It will be very difficult indeed. Anyway, so those are ways I think that we can help validate ideas and hopefully draw more attention to these indigenous traditions that really can offer so much to us. Anyway, I know I went on for quite a bit there, so I'll just kind of pause here. But I think that's kind of going in that area of the quote, but also with a lot more emphasis on something which I'm actually quite serious about, which is changing epistemology. I think our epistemology in psychology and psychiatry is killing people, and I really want to see that change.
Thank you, Dr. Ian. That's very thought-provoking indeed. I think you've laid an excellent, given us an excellent platform for Julia's investigations, which I know about and you're about to find out about. So, Julia, could you, may I hand it over to you? Could you say a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, which questions you're investigating, and how it is that you came to be interested in those questions? I know that's an interesting story too. And so I'll hand it now over to the two of you to dialogue on your material, Julia.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you, Dr. Ian, for your comments. I really enjoyed kind of hearing a little bit more about your relationship with that article, especially your ideas about beauty and bringing that more into kind of our psychological thinking into the therapeutic space. So to share kind of how I got to the place of my interest in hypnosis, as Steve mentioned, I'm studying Sowa Rigpa, the traditional Tibetan medicine and science of healing, with Dr. Nita Chennaksang through the Sowa Rigpa Institute, along with Dr. Caroline Van Dam, who kind of teaches us the Western psychological tradition. So we are integrating an exploration of both sides of this psychology of the mind and the relationship between the mind and the body. So as part of that process, I've been looking into the experience of hypnosis. I've received hypnosis myself, and I wanted to share a little bit about what that experience was like, because I did really relate it to experiences that I've had studying Vajrayana Buddhism, at the beginner level, and some experiences that I've had with meditative absorption. So, another aspect of this is also that I am a biracial person of European and Asian descent. And so I think I do have a deep-seated interest, at a personal level, finding moments of connection, moments where there are similarities in thinking and experience on both sides of the tradition, and thinking about how there's complementary aspects for both traditions, right? That there can be aspects of Eastern thinking and medicine that are complementary to the Western practices, and that there's also Western practices that may be complementary, harmonious, and symmetrical in some ways with practices on the Eastern side. So with that in mind, I did, as a research subject, my case study is myself. So I went into an experience of hypnotherapy in August, where I tried to kind of tackle the issue of phone addiction in my own life. And I felt like that was kind of the perfect storm, because there are so many factors going into the experience of attachment to the phone, the dopamine injection that you're getting in your brain. And there's kind of physical stimuli, there's visual stimuli, and then there's kind of the influence that you were describing, Dr. Ian, of our social cultural environment, and how there are so many forces that are, inducing grasping, right? For profit, for capitalism, for consumption, to ease kind of feelings of pain and discomfort and emptiness that people are experiencing, kind of living in our modern industrialized world. So I took this problem into hypnotherapy, thinking that it was also a very tough problem that would have clear results. because I wanted something that, there would also be some kind of evidence that came out of this process for me. So I went to 2 sessions with a hypnotherapist who was also a licensed psychotherapist. And so in the first session, we discussed his phone addiction. In the second session, we actually did hypnotherapy together. And I guess I would say that I went into the experience thinking that it would be more of an altered state of consciousness. That was kind of my intuitive feeling about what it might be like. I have experienced some other forms of altered states of consciousness, and I thought it could be like that, or that it could be more similar to kind of the hypnagogic state between dream and sleep. And I was surprised because when I went through the experience, it was really much more like meditative absorption. And I felt that it was more connected to experiences I had, doing especially visualization-based meditative practices, through our work and our studies at the Sowa Rigpa Institute. And I will say that this hypnotherapy was tremendously effective. I went to 1 session of hypnotherapy where I kind of was regressed. It was kind of toggling between visualizing a feeling of safety connected to a specific memory, and then kind of toggling to kind of an age regression where I was experiencing, some negative emotions, that I think I was avoiding with part of my addictive phone use, right? So kind of encountering, visualizing, and fighting against kind of this mass of feelings, that I think I had been avoiding through kind of touching and using my phone in this addictive way. So after that process happened, I had kind of a 1-week lag time where I think my conscious mind was not very fixated on the problem, but my organic intelligence, that's kind of below the level of executive cognition, was kind of working on this problem. And after a week lag time, I pretty much just stopped using my phone completely. And the craving was extinguished for the most part. And I would say that I have maintained that, with some lapses, not with perfect discipline, but, I've maintained this feeling for most of the last 4 months. So it was extremely successful, right? And it was something I think that was a powerful experience. It did affect my understanding of the self, and kind of the malleability of the self, and also kind of what you were describing, I think, which is that there is a more perfect, more sophisticated, more intelligent wisdom in the mind body that is below the executive level of cognition. And I know that you've pointed in the past, Dr. Ian, to kind of Milton Erickson and his comments about how the storehouse that we have, which is related also to Buddhist concepts of the storehouse of memory, that can actually be a healing factor. And I think also with our teacher, Dr. Nita Chenaksong, and his teachings about how the body's intelligence is, beautiful, well organized, organic, and always with us. Part of the challenge that we're experiencing, I think, is to connect with that, right?
Yeah.
So I think connecting with it. And there's so many layers that are separating us from that organic intelligence. So I think the reason this experience of hypnosis was so powerful, and I think interesting and also moving, is because I feel that it was a bridge, right? A bridge to that part of myself. And that there was a capacity for problem solving that was unleashed even in 1 session that drastically affected my daily experience. So I guess I'm interested, with that in mind, kind of hearing a little bit more in terms of your experience clinically, practicing hypnosis, maybe even experiencing hypnosis for yourself, how you see kind of the hypnotic state and the meditative state, and how the meditative state might differ, especially from maybe self-hypnosis. What are kind of like the aspects of the meditative state and the hypnotic state that have moments of resonance without, as you said, conflating the 2 traditions, right? Because I'm also wary, as you are, I think, of over conflating these 2 ideas. And so I appreciate that you're kind of calling it hypnotic-like as opposed to, equivalent to hypnosis.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I heard it say crazy dualism again, right? Either something is the same or it's different. There's
Right.
not, they're blended in some way. And the individual variance in hypnotic responsiveness and meditative responsiveness is also wide. Some people, when they meditate, believe it or not, some people, when I teach them to meditate, and I start saying, and if you find that your mind is wandering, just go back to your breathing. And, first time you teach someone to meditate, there's always this thing. And so I'm like, I'll say it a few times. And I've literally had people say, the only time my mind is wandering is when you keep talking. And I was like, you mean you're just focusing on your breathing and that's it? That's all you have? It's like, yeah, that's all I have. And then meanwhile, there's like 95% others who don't have advanced dissociation already. Haven't really hacked their anterior cingulate yet. Where they need some encouragement like that. So, in answering your question, first I want to point out that this dualism infects this debate itself and actually causes debate and causes people to split politically. Because like there are some people like, oh, we don't want to be associated with the dirty hypnosis. Oh, get those people away, the Svengalis or something. I mean, I do like his wardrobe, but it's just a lich, so forget that. But it looks good in the film. No, this is ridiculous. Like some people think meditation good, hypnosis bad, and some people are literally the opposite. I once almost got fired for I won't say what university, but a university medical school almost fired me because they didn't want me teaching meditation. And I was like, what? You don't want me to teach meditation? It's like, yeah, you're a Buddhist. You're proselytizing to them. And I was like, what? I'm teaching John Kabat-Zinn. Even he came and spoke at this university. What are you talking about? And they're like, no, you cannot teach it because you're Buddhist. Someone else could do it, but because you're Buddhist, then it will slip out. And I was like, all right, well, then I'll just teach people how to meditate on, no, not meditate. I'll teach people how to engage in self-hypnosis by focusing on their breathing. Would that be okay? Like, yeah, that will be fine. Just don't use the word meditation was what I got out of that. And so again, we've reached actually, this is a very practical area of how dualism is killing things. Because not only is this causing needless divisions in the scientific research on similar phenomena, but actually people really fixate on them. So for instance, when I went to many other places, not only would people not want me to do one thing or the other, but I want to say these things have nothing to do with one another. And I get that also from the Dharma people too. They're like, oh, don't talk about your dirty hypnosis and Dzogchen at the same time. It's only engaged in the pure Dharma. And I'm like, well, the pure Dharma, that sounds kind of monistic to me. It's like pure Dharma, it's like, I don't know. It sounds a little philosophically unsound the way you're approaching these things. Isn't everything empty and contextual? But at any rate, people really do that. So having said that, I'm so glad that you also really appreciate how important it is for us not to say, meditation is pure hypnosis, or for that matter, hypnosis is pure meditation. But there is some overlap in these domains. And the thing that I find the most interesting is that it's people. There are people who are meditative people, and there are people who are hypnotically gifted people. There are, I have no doubt, and even, I've done the measurements. When you find the Malarepas of the world, there are high hypnotizables. When you find high hypnotizables, they have mystical experiences like Milarepa. They don't always talk about them because, frankly, the dualism of psychiatry has threatened them and their existence outside of state mental institutions. But no doubt, there is an overlap in these fields. Most importantly, I think, in the people. And that's what I find the most interesting. The people who have the most advanced abilities, they are the same kind of people. They're very loving. They are very high in empathy. They tend to be kind of simple people, but they tend to have amazing fantasy life, or what other people would call as fantasy, I guess. And they have fantastic experiences. Let's just say it that way. rather than whether there's fantasy versus reality. See that all these dualisms constantly infect this dialogue, so to speak. Oh well. Um, but yeah, there are certain overlapping phenomena, of course. There are even like phrases, like just let happen whatever happens. I do find this a lot. I mean, I heard Zen teachers saying that one time. Just allow to happen whatever's happening. It's like, the first person I heard say that was Ernest Hilgard from Stanford, giving the Stanford profile of hypnotic ability. It's really quite amazing. So I would say, yeah, there are definite phenomena that we could say really overlap. But first of all, the people, because the problem is we have this dualistic understanding of these concepts of meditation. Meditation does this, hypnosis does that. But the context of this is that meditation does different things for the different kind of people experiencing it. Hypnosis does different things for the different kind of people experiencing that. Now, the most research on the person effect of this was uh, one of my great mentors, Ron Pakala, has just done an enormous amount of research on the different types of hypnotic experiences that people have. And he came up with the most empirically based phenomenological inventory of hypnosis that's been invented this day. It's called the Phenomenology of Consciousness Inventory. He's another philosophy guy, but he's also a statistics guy. So he invented an instrument, and after many, many years, found 52 key questions to ask about people's altering experiences. And so the most important thing is we not think about hypnosis as a thing, but think about it as a process that works differently in different kinds of people. And interestingly enough, those same kind of things seem to happen in people who not only are good at meditation, but Ron's research has shown that are also good at firewalking, and that are also good at Christian prayer, and that are also good at long-term pot smokers, people experiencing LSD, people experiencing ayahuasca. Ron's instrument is so good for that because you can compare any mind consciousness altering experience using his instrument. He normed it for that purpose. And even though it is based on materialistic paradigm, it has integrated enough phenomenological experiences through the validation process that he used to create it. And it's reliable enough that it can be used to study anything. So yeah, when we talk about these domains, I don't like to think of them as hypnosis is this. Like I remember there was this time when the idiots would say, "Oh, hypnosis, that's a theta state of EG, and meditation, that's more like alpha." And I shouldn't say idiots because a lot of these were my friends. And even one time, I used to think that myself. I'm an old EEG guy. My dad did EG biofeedback while I was growing up. Even he used it on me. And I grew up studying psychophysiology and in particular EEG research. I did a lot as an undergrad, at least, in some sense. And the problem is that actually everything is so contextual, just like Dharma says. It's just like, yeah, would you like to see someone in a hypnotic trance in theta state? No doubt. We know that high hypnotizables walk around generally with more predominance of theta going on in their brain. However, if you ask them to engage in an activity of sports psychology while engaging in hypnotic trance, they will very fastly go to beta. Mm-hmm. So it's all contextual on what you need. There is no biological determinism this way. It's an interaction of what the situation is calling for, in the same way that it is said that our enlightened mind has an empty nature. And so hypnosis has empty nature, meditation has empty nature. It changes for the situations and the needs that you have in the situation. Like, I don't know if we would have Tumo yoga, except that people were trying to meditate in cold caves. You know, as I think, I don't know. I think that's how that arose. The people had the need for it, and to overcome the dualism of, you know, being cold and uh, feeling cold and feeling hungry, apparently too, and living in cave. And so I think it is important to resist coming up with essentialist definitions of non-dualistic phenomena. But what I can say is that the people experiencing them that's where you really find the similarity. People who are good at meditation, that are the same kind of people who are good at hypnosis. Of course, there are some differences. Like, there is a thing called aphantasia. Not everybody has imagery, this kind of stuff. But I find the similarities most provocative and interesting in terms of the similarities of the types of people who have the experiences, much more so than I'm interested in the similarities of the names of the phenomena, which I think are just that, actually, at this point. They are just names, but they're important because the real people have practiced those things. You may say I'm a very people-oriented person. I find the names are important to people, so I will use the names and respect the people who embody these practices. But the people are more important to me than whether hypnosis is a theta state or fast beta. That is of little interest to me anymore, especially since that experiment's been done to death, and still people keep trying to do it out of the dualistic spirit of science. Very interesting. But anyway, that's where I went first with your question. It's a very important question, and I kind of deflected on that. You know, I think I have to admit, because I don't want to offer. I actually did once offer a definition of hypnosis that had to do with my own theory of it being empathy. But for the most part, I'm more interested in the people that have experienced the phenomenon than I am in the so-called process.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that actually is also why one of the reasons that I wanted to ask you these questions is because, you know, we and our classmates are, for the most part, people who are students of Buddhism or who have a Buddhist practice, but who will be practicing as counselors or psychotherapists or massage therapists or in yoga. And I'm just wondering, you know, there are groups of people who are attracted to, you know, seeking therapy with practitioners that have this orientation, right? Psychologically or spiritually. So I'm wondering if you think that there are ways that we can take maybe knowledge from the hypnotic tradition and bring it into some of the practices we might be doing as Buddhist practitioners, you know, whether that's kind of guided meditation or working with clients on visualization, or maybe even being in the more hypnotic way, kind of strategic about language, use of words, you know, kind of trying to get at someone's problem or habit or symptoms, right? More with the language of hypnosis, which is, you know, potentially permissive, indirect, but strategic.
Yes, I think you're really pointing to another way that we can really help Dharma, you know, Dharma practitioners and Dharma people. Because no doubt, I've been in enough retreat settings to see people freaking out every once in a while. I'll never forget one time I was assigned a guy who was supposed to teach me this very ritualistic way of Japanese way of eating mindfully called oryoki, and it's really beautiful and wonderful. But I have to admit, nothing could have prepared me for that. The way I grew up in rural Illinois, eating barbecue meat and stuff, you know, hot dogs. There's all these bowls and different rules about when you're supposed to eat and how you ask, and everything. So crazy, so many rules. And to ask this man to teach me Oryoki, who clearly was having psychotic break, and that pulled him out of his solitary retreat, and asked him to teach me Oryoki. I could tell he was sort of like, it's like, why am I teaching an illusory person anything? Literally, you can't exist, you bizarre character, you fiction, So I think we can definitely offer this community many things, and not just people in acute psychotic distress, but sometimes it feels to me like I run into people in Dharma communities who have become very attached to ideas of the Dharma rather than the heart of the Dharma. And they have developed, though I've actually never written about this, so I think we'll talk about this actually. One of the areas I also do research on is called repressive coping. And this is a tendency of people to keep secrets from themselves about things that they find threatening, as the original theory of what repressive coping is, that we keep secrets that we find too threatening. Like, I'll give you an example. I grew up completely, since you mentioned being biracial, I grew up completely disliking being Sri Lankan in rural Illinois. All I wanted was to be a normal white boy, and it just wasn't happening. It was really, but nevertheless, I tried. I really got into all the things all the other guys were into, and I liked a lot of them, of course. But I didn't want to think of myself this way. So this is an example of the kind of secret a person can keep from themselves, often around things that have social stigma. So when you get in this way, you have a tendency to cut off the range of your affect. And I've really noticed it. Like one time we were doing a Dzogchen retreat with the Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, and I won't, not to, because it was kind of a secret thing, I won't say everything about it, but let's just say we were doing some very powerful Dzogchen practice, and it was making us feel very blissful and loving. And I noticed that there was a group of us who seemed to be like really, while we were practicing together, you could really see, even one woman was making these sounds like, ha. And there was a group of people that, and personally, when I heard that, I was like, oh yeah, she's getting it. How wonderful, and it felt good to me. I didn't make the sound myself, but I kind of felt the sound. And but then there was clearly another group of people in that room doing the same practice that were severely irritated with her. And they were sort of like, like, why does she keep making this orgasm sound, and they're like, oh, she's ruining our practice, this kind of thing. Whereas I kind of felt, and a number of us who were seemed to be getting it was sort of like, I don't know, it was almost like frosting on the cake for me to hear her doing that, because it felt really genuine, and it was wonderful to behold that and to be a part of that. Like I didn't essentialize it, and I tried not to pull it in too much, because then I was out of my own experience. But I could just let it be as it was, and enjoy, and and even when people like were bothering and complaining about her, I would hear them sometimes between sessions say, who is that person making the terrible noises, this kind of thing. Even I was like, okay, they're, just a little discouraged. They haven't got their practice together. So, I'm not going to push them away. But it was making quite a number of us like become very, very blissful to do this. All right, it was Tumo yoga. But we're doing this Tumo yoga and really very blissful and very powerful. Then even funnier thing happened was that as we got more and more blissful, sometimes we strayed more into the crazy, playful way and started behaving a little outrageously, and maybe in a way that was, not so much wise, but at least it was fun. We started having food fights during during lunch. I didn't know how it happened, but we started throwing food at one another. And meanwhile, the folks who didn't really seem to be getting the practice, they started to get this very sad meditation look. And that sometimes we called it, actually, we developed this term during that retreat. They are like sad meditators. And it said they look like very austere, even like, some of those Thai statues and things, and all the ribs sticking out. Uh, but I think, so I'll finish the story, then I'll get to why I'm talking about this. What ended up happens was, finally, one of these people who was very sad meditator says went to Rinpoche and started actually complaining about myself and several other people in particular who were, maybe too attached to our bliss, perhaps. And that I would have accepted that as a possibility. I didn't feel that way, but it could have been possible. I would have entertained the question. And they said, they are throwing food. They were splashing monks in the pool, and literally the monks were splashed us first, actually. We jumped in the pool, and monks began splashing us, and we're splashing monks and behaving crazy, just having normal fun, silly things. And so they said, splash monk, also, making bad noises during the practice, making joyful noises during the practice, telling jokes, laughing very loud. And then making my practice impossible. These people are bad. And then Rinpoche said to them, maybe you should be more like these people. Why did you join them? Why did you sit at the table with them, eat with them, throw food? and then they had the honesty and decency to then come and tell me the whole story. It literally was, they said, and Rinpoche said I should come and sit with you, and I think he is correct. Now, the reason I'm telling this story is I do notice that sometimes people relate to Dzogchen and these practices in this very austere way that I think has a quality of grasping along with it that invalidates it. Now, I don't mean to say that, doing austere practices is bad, because I definitely want to do some of those myself and have done some. And I don't mind that at all, like, engaging in austerities involving restrictions of speech or changes in diet or fasting. These kinds of things I think are sacred and can be good. You just don't want to do them in a very attached way. And so when I see people doing that, they're like my good friends who didn't seem to be able to get Tumo because they were taking it too damn seriously. Whereas I allowed it to be whatever it was. And there was no doubt that it did remind me of some of these childlike energies. And I think allowing them to flow through me actually, and not resisting them, like not resisting the part of me that doesn't want to be seen as childlike. Because then no one will respect you, you naughty person, you naughty trickster, no one will trust you. You say aestheticism is important. Because we all know something is true or it isn't, you know. But at any rate, so I really feel that there is a place for austerity in practice. So that's not where my argument is. It's about repressing one's emotional experience. So I think when people practice austerities, if they're doing that in an open way and they're not grasping onto the practice, then they will get benefit from that. But even if you do a blissful practice, with too much grasping, like, oh, the fire should look like this, and the syllables should look like this as they go round and round, and ask the teacher a million questions about the very most precise visualizations, and get so hung up on it. And I think actually, if you have that kind of visual practice ability, which I'll be honest, I don't. Then I think if you have that kind of precision, like to look around the lotus flower, around the heart, then this one should be this color, this petal should be this color, the syllable, this one should be Ram on here, Hung on here, and Hri over here. Then if you have that kind of capacity for visual imagery, then yes, just to feel fully immersed in the practice, I believe you should actually attempt to attach to that level of specificity. However, I think if you have that level of attachment and you don't have that level of ability, then you're fucked. Then you're like the unhappy meditators, you know, because you're like trying to get this non-dualistic experience with this very precise dualistic visual imagery. And you think if you don't get it, then you're not going to have the experience. And that creates an expectancy that blocks Tumo experience. Meanwhile, if you're a bunch of weirdos who throw food at one another, then you could start to feel the joy in your heart that was there all along anyways. And now suddenly Tumo works because you didn't have this, precise expectancy about visual imagery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very tricky area here. You know, I really, as I don't mean to say that I think that the precision around visual imagery is not important. It's clearly quite important to the right kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not that person, or heaven forbid, you have aphantasia and you have no visual imagery, it doesn't mean you can't practice Tumo. It just means your Tumo practice needs to look different. And that's the one thing I've always loved about Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche is he teaches the person in front of him. And he helps them define their innate experience rather than one time he even told me, because I didn't want to say this is a dream. I was actually afraid to say this is a dream in the lucid dreaming practice. I was afraid to say that because I grew up with all kinds of crazy dissociation in my life. I thought if I say this is a dream, I'm going to get even worse. You know, I was like, oh, I'm frightened. So I went and asked him. I was like, oh, God, what should I do? And then he says, well, actually, this is a very ancient tradition, and I love and respect very much. But maybe, why don't you try saying this is real? Then you say this is not the traditional way, but while we're on retreat, why don't you say this is real, and then come back to me tomorrow and you'll see what has happened. And so then I started to say like this is real, and then that started to make things feel unreal. No, I had to develop. Then I was like, I'm just messing with my head with language. Fuck this stupid stuff. So I said, okay, I came back the next day. I started to say this is real, and that felt good. But then I was like, oh, actually, why am I making this huge distinction? between real and unreal. We're practicing lucid dreaming. Am I making this huge difference? Like that was the point of this, was to become more mindful of how things really are. They're dreamlike all the time, anyways.
Mm.
At least the way we experience it is, we never leave the dream. When we're
Mm.
awake, never. There's no difference. Even Steve Coslin's research shows that with hypnosis. Right, Rob, I'm so sorry. I went off on your question quite a
Oh, no,
bit.
that's actually perfect transition, I think, because I was actually kind of curious what your thoughts were in terms of, the dreamlike nature of reality and kind of working with clients or patients through hypnosis to bring them into that space in a more safe and collaborative way. Because as you said, we're working with the patient or the client that's in front of us. Not everyone has a background in Vajrayana practices or Dzogchen or, the very kind of sophisticated, history of working with the dream self or this subtle self, the second psychological self. So I guess I was thinking that maybe one way that hypnosis and, Buddhist psychotherapy or Buddhist counseling might be able to work in tandem is because we can use perhaps hypnotic traditions or hypnotherapy as a way to bring people into the experience of working with the dream self, in a collaborative way, right? In a guided way that is maybe more secular. And I don't want to conflate the two because one has a deep spiritual background and one is more secular, right? But maybe that secular space can sometimes be right for the right client to allow them to engage with the dream self or, the self that you're engaging with in illusory body yoga or lucid dream yoga.
Yeah, I think this is a great possibility, and it would rectify the split that Herbert Benson and Jon Kabat-Zinn gave to us around secular meditation. And so I think we could, like you may notice, like in the study of meditation, they didn't start with Tumo. They didn't start with a Powa. They did in transpersonal psychology, but not in medicine, not in mainstream clinical psych.
Right.
The Powa and Chud and other things we studied in transpersonal. But so I would really like to see that, just what you've said. I would really like to see that. I would like to see in the way that Alejandro Cholreich has started to do more than started. It's been more than 10 years on this now. I think maybe more than 5 studies looking at different Tibetan meditation or yoga practices, the silent practice basically, for helping people with cancer and other conditions to manage anxiety. I'd really, really like to see elements of these traditions either be put into formats like Jon Kabat-Zinn and Herbert Benson did for meditation, but also for some of these other things like Tibetan yoga. And at the same time, some of these things do have direct correspondence. There is already a hypnotic tradition of lucid dream research. My good friend Deirdre Barrett has done a lot of that. Wonderful person, amazing artist as well. So I think we could do it around things like lucid dreaming. It is actually no interference there. There is already a tradition in Western psychology of lucid dreaming research, and it has already encountered Tibetan Buddhism. And there's a long history. Even Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche hang out with Stephen LaBerge,
Mhm.
So there's a long history of interaction. And before him, Namki Norbu and other Tibetan gurus has really given all these teachings and made them public. You can read the books, there are videos, you can take online classes even. So I think there are certain standalone phenomena like that where it's possible, like particularly lucid dreaming. I think there are some things I'm reluctant myself to do, and that would be like Trekcho and Togal. I can't really think of a hypnotic equivalent of that besides our work on hypnotic hallucinations. And that is all experimental, and so I'm encouraged to use the approach of bridge there more in terms of not clinical psychology, but more in terms of experimental psychology. Like I feel like some of these phenomena, I feel like we want to study more before. The potential to misunderstand Togol has got to be enormous. I mean, it's just to say, these are just, post-hypnotic suggestions that your teacher gave you or something. But then the problem with that is we don't really have a good enough way of understanding what's amazing about post-hypnotic suggestion. Like when if you just say it's just a post-hypnotic suggestion, it's actually a tool that changes reality. So is that really so bad, to say that? So I don't know. Some of the things I think I'm a little more reluctant, but things where there already has been connection made, like lucid dreaming, certainly Tibetan yoga, and where other things, and certainly the philosophies of mind, like that is where I think everything is fine, just comparing the philosophies. And then to whatever extent the practices can also be studied using the same paradigms, then I think we might get to a place where I would also integrate for patients. So generally speaking, when people come to see me, 100% learn mindfulness meditation. 100% will eventually learn some self-hypnosis. And these days also I'm teaching Tibetan yoga because my teacher gave me permission.
Mm-hmm.
However, to go beyond that in clinical work, only I have done when it has been someone who already studied with a very powerful master.
Mm-hmm.
So I have treated folks who studied with Dilgo Kensei and many different powerful teachers. And the way that I treat them is more about remembering what their master had said. And so I treat them very much like a client-centered psychotherapist at that point. I don't teach them about the Bön. I ask them about what their teacher taught them and how can they reconnect with what their teacher taught and maybe get it, at a deeper level, or what did they believe their teacher, would really want them to do. So I don't actually then begin teaching, even though I've been given permission to teach a Salung and meditation and things. On the mindfulness and only Tibetan yoga will I myself do. And I didn't even used to do that actually, but when a teacher gives permission, then I thought, okay, I'll do these things. And also there's really good research on all of these things now about their benefit, including Alejandro Chorraig did a lot of the Tibetan yoga stuff. So I can even say fundamentalist Christians from Texas do very well with Tibetan yoga because of Alejandro Chorraig's research. It's really good, actually. But other than that, I think some of the most important stuff, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking too much like a experimental psychologist, even though I think I'm probably more clinical than that. I don't know. See, there's this dualism again. Are you clinical or are you experimental?
Right.
It's really crazy the way we define categories of experience. And when really, I think the best clinicians are always people with great experimental ideas. And the very best experimentalists are able to capture the truth of the therapy room and what that interaction is like and the therapeutic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
In hypnosis, we've had some really fantastic people who were like that, and still living now, like David Spiegel is this way. It's fantastic. Experimentalist, did all of this great fMRI stuff, and yet also his fantastic clinician as well. and it really comes off in his clinical writing, of course. At any rate, so that's kind of where I'm at. Let me ask you where you're at, though, because you also have taken Samaya vows, right? Do you think I go too far, and how far would you go?
I mean, I think I agree that it's really important not to disconnect the practices from the spiritual aspects of the teaching, you know, the dedication of the practice to benefit all sentient beings, right? Because there is something about the hypnotherapy side that is more individualistic, you know, it's kind of more intrapsychic, right? And it doesn't necessarily have this openness and the kind of giving and the spiritual component that comes from you know, Buddhist practice. So I would say that they're in no way replaceable, but I do feel that there is something about providing a secular doorway, right, to certain aspects of experience that then allow people to have a more fluid and open sense of self, you know, a greater idea of possibility, a greater idea of the fluidity of the self. And I think in the Western tradition that hypnosis has provided a pathway for a lot of people to experience both the ritual of induction and the power of ritual and the power of expectation and the power of the therapeutic relationship in like a real way. And that being in you know, in the state of absorption, which isn't very common for people who don't have you know, a meditative practice, right? Like most people are not necessarily voluntarily able by themselves to go into that place of absorption. Having someone there to facilitate it for you and to be strategically therapeutic can be very powerful, right? And to do that in the kind of person-centered, kind of Rogerian way of having empathy, unconditional positive regard, you know, and a real intention to work collaboratively with the client to bring about change, you know, and change that can be very impactful. I also think just around areas of pain management alone, right, and the way that chronic pain can affect, you know, suicidality, kind of create depression. You know, there's just like a lot of aspects of pain and psychosomatic mind-body connections between pain that hypnosis, I think, has a lot to bring to the table, potentially. And that even those experiences, right, like when someone from a secular perspective starts to work with their own pain or starts to work with their own sensations, you know, bodily sensations in a way that transforms their mood, like there can be a new sense of possibility, fluidity, you know, that can open the door to kind of a greater spiritual connection, whether through Buddhism or through other practices, right? Like not just Buddhism, any form of religion that's pro-social and loving and connected and helps people re-engage with the world at large, with other people, and brings the best part of themselves out, which I think comes back to kind of your comment about just more beauty, more aesthetics, you know, bringing kind of this positive vision of the world that we want to create into all aspects of our practice as therapists, and thinking about these different traditions we can pull from. And it doesn't have to be so regimented or dualistic, right? Like, I don't think it has to be like, I think as long as there's the right intention and collaborative, empowering relationship between the therapist and the client, you know, there can be ethical practice, and we don't have to be too concerned about labeling, you know, labeling.
Yeah.
Like labeling what we're doing, right?
Yeah, I really, hearing you speak of this, yeah, we're in very similar places. I I don't I don't feel like I'm ready yet to fully integrate, you know, some aspects of um, the practices. However, I've often learned that it's really unnecessary. So when people did come to see me who are, you know, very advanced Dzogchen practitioners, uh, and you know, they wanted to discuss how their practice could be related to hypnosis. And one thing that I did notice was that many times I did not actually have to teach Dzogchen to them, and that all that was necessary was to do the hypnotic work that I would do with anyone, in which I'm fully empowered and authorized to do in that sense, you know, by the tradition of clinical psychology. And then often what happened was I would remark to them, how does this seem to you in relationship to the other kinds of experiences you've had in your life? And then they would immediately then go to, you know, oh, this reminded me so much of when I had the pointing out instruction in, like when you gave the, you know, instruction about how to use hypnosis to enter lucid dreaming, or how to use hypnosis to talk with other parts of myself, around imaginary table or something like this. It reminded me of like when Dogo Kensei said this and that to me, and then the interesting thing is that at least in the people that I've worked with, without me having to teach them Dzogchen, it seems to have really helped reignite their passion to practice their tradition. Because a lot of times people are coming to me in this situation that feel some sort of dissatisfaction that happened while they were practicing Dharma. Something didn't go well on retreat, or some kind of problem happened there, and they've many times either lost touch with their teacher, or the teacher died, or the lineage itself is in trouble. And so then these people, well, you understand Dharma and you know hypnosis, so maybe you will teach me the hypnosis side of things, because the Dharma side didn't go so well. And so like, okay, great, I'll just teach you purely about this, and we'll integrate what you already know. That's no problem. We would integrate what you already know. And so I encourage them to follow up on what they learned and what they liked, and it's interesting. Learning a little bit of hypnosis often seems to bring people to respect what they already had learned. Or even some people said, like, I didn't understand what on earth they were talking about until first we did this with hypnosis. Like, I didn't actually have any understanding of what this was supposed to be about until we started doing things using hypnosis. So I think that is an area that I feel really good about. I still feel nervous, though, about what I don't understand about Dzogchen and Vajrayana, and want to be humble about that, because I could be fucked up. In fact,
Well,
I know I am, actually.
yeah, I think we all have that. We all have that feeling.
But on the other hand, I will say I experience enough benefit myself through going through this simultaneously, through having grown up in the hypnosis lineage and grown up also with the Buddhist background, and then encountering the Bön. And so I can say that it has worked for me, and it has been exceedingly helpful, and possibly saved my life personally a number of times. I mean, actually, literally. That's another episode I received. Oh, I had the Guillain-Barré syndrome, almost stopped breathing. Yeah. Um, so I can say it's good for me, but I try to remain very humble. I'm not empowered to teach Dzogchen. Uh, I have been empowered to practice Dzogchen, and that's what I love to do. But I'm very I don't know. I feel actually devotion is a good thing. I really like, and I'm also skeptical whether uh, it's been good for clinical psychology that we took the devotion out of it. Like for instance, in clinical psychology, all the devotion that is written about, like how we should be devoted to our client. We have no manual where it says, "Here's how to be a good client. You should be devoted to your therapist." Now, there are many cultural reasons why we don't do that. And I'm not saying that we do need to do that, but there's something like actually, I have a good friend who wrote a book that is actually kind of like this, but it's written for academics, though. It's called How Clients Make Therapy Work. And it goes into the research about what clients do to make therapy work. But that is devotion, actually. Devotion through practice, which is different. I mean, the word devotion in English connotes many things that we don't like, and that we have all these cultural misunderstandings about what gurus are and things. Uh, Even people use that word pejoratively, guru, Who's your guru, Ian? I've actually heard someone say that in Missouri, So I don't know. I want to be really careful around doing this because I feel like there's so many things that there's so much more low-hanging fruit that's safer to eat. I think I think I encourage everyone to climb as high as the tree personally. But if you're going to guide other people along with you, you better already be fully enlightened as far as I'm concerned. And I know I'm not. So I really want to be humble and devoted to the guidelines that my teachers gave me, which
Right.
was not to fully mix things unless I
Right.
was fully realized.
Right, right. No, that makes perfect sense. That is a very, I think, healthy and humble attitude about it. But I am curious, it's just my kind of, I think the last question I kind of had was what you were describing about when you do teach hypnosis, which is your expertise and you're fully qualified to teach and train people in, what are the few things that you do teach to people? For example, people like us, people who might be Buddhist counselors or psychotherapists, are there a couple of things you often teach? What is your
Yes.
recommendation for our training? Yes, as we move forward.
Anyone who has ever done any mantra work, saying, oh, or in the Bön we go, oh, either you're ready to learn post-hypnotic suggestion like that, So I teach people, it's very possible who've done a lot of mantra work that can easily learn how to use post-hypnotic suggestion for anything at all that they need. Usually I start with just neutral words like calm, relaxed, and free. But this is a wonderful thing, because, Dharma people, a lot of times, if they are like the people I was describing who may have become over intellectualized in their practice, and they'll spend most of their time debating theories of emptiness rather than practicing, which is a kind of practice too. So I don't want to, be too much of a mischief maker, but no doubt study and practice is good in debate. But if they're all really connected to that and you're not really experiencing, the emptiness of one's own experience in a moment-to-moment way, theory is just making more problems, and so I think a lot of times people who have that kind of grasping too much to the concepts of the Dharma really could use some basic tools for managing anxiety, because that is what causes repressive coping, as that people are over intellectualized about what they think their ideal self-presentation should be for their teacher. I've seen this many times. It's like people out of the beauty of what could be unattached devotion ends up in this repressive coping. Like someone is trying to prove how devoted they are, and instead all they're doing is repressing more and more and falling further and further away from the direct perception. And maybe there is a way in which, I don't know, you repress enough, you have some kind of crisis that brings you the truth, and Naropa hits you with a sandal on the face, and finally you get how stupid you've been. Maybe that is how that works. But on the other hand, I think some of these people could just use some basic skills in anxiety management and learning how to let things be as they are, like you're being told. Like, what does it mean to let things be as they are? How can I be the student that looks like they're letting things be as they are? Should I have long hair? Should I have short hair? That's kind of how this ends up getting screwed up, is that people start thinking about, how can I fake it? One way I've noticed that people try to fake mindfulness is this old obsession about precision. Like, even people will try to subtly mention that while you're on retreat. They're like, did you happen to hear at 9:10 p.m. there was a woodpecker sound while we were in session? And if I did hear, then I'll be happy. But and there is something good about having presence, no doubt. But the way that people will try to fake that is by noticing all these precise observations, and yeah, precision in vision or any other sense is just as diluted. Now you become an expert in an erroneous view. It's really the term. It comes from Tenzin Wangyal. He talks about people who become experts in erroneous views. And
Mm.
actually, he was including psychology in that, because I have no awareness of the emptiness of self, even though all the evidence shows that there is not stability in personality at all. None of the
Mhm.
traits are very stable except for introversion, really. Extroversion is very modifiable. But anyway, yeah, I think this is very exciting times. And I must say, could I ask you a question?
Sure.
I'm very interested in people, as obviously anyone who studies clinical psych. But you mentioned several things that I wanted to get your take on these experiences. So first of all, I wanted to ask, um, tell me about the intervention again. You was mentioning that you use, and you mentioned that it's really helped you not to uh, experience, I guess, as much craving for using your phone.
Mhm.
Has it had any unintended side effects?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that for the first month that I asked, so after the intervention, I went through, I would honestly say like 3 to 4 weeks of withdrawal, right? Like I experienced true dopamine withdrawal. I felt like my mood was extremely low. I had like no, I had little, I had little enthusiasm for normal activities, right? And I think it helped to have, basic psychological understanding of dopamine and the way the phone is really kind of this trigger. And with homeostasis, obviously you're lowering your baseline levels of dopamine, right? So having that understanding helped me kind of go through this period in a more with like more, I guess, kind of equanimity, like with more, with kind of like a less aversive feeling about it, right? So I had that experience. And at the same time, I was trying to kind of, through diet and lifestyle and the things that I've learned through Tibetan medicine and my Sowa Rigpa practice to just kind of like live in a way that was healthier and kind of supporting myself like through this process of separating from my phone. But I will say that, I don't think that I would have been able to make this separation from my phone without the hypnotherapy, because I also am a believer in talk therapy. I have my own therapist. I'm a student of psychotherapy, right? So I'm not saying that I don't value not that I don't value the normal therapeutic process of talk therapy, but I really truly don't believe that I could have gotten to this place only through talk therapy. There was something about like the intervention that was very powerful. And I will say that what I didn't share when I first brought up the intervention was that there was kind of a moment of emotional catharsis, where when I was kind of in the age regression and fighting off this black mass of kind of these feelings that I was trying to push away, I cried and I surrendered to that. I surrendered in that moment, right? And there was some kind of release that happened as a result. And so I do think that feeling and like that connection to my memory and the kind of intensity that came from connecting it to childhood memory was something that unlocked this kind of hidden intelligence in terms of just putting aside this craving for the phone and reaching for the phone, to try to avoid negative emotions. So that was for me like the most interesting part about it, that there was this so many senses were combined. There was kind of my inner world, which I was experiencing. I was able to visualize quite clearly kind of this experience. And then the hypnotherapist that I was working with was kind of physically pushing down on me. So I was having this kind of somatic experience of like fight, right? And so that part of it, I think, was really interesting, right? Or like it was unique or it was distinct from other forms of like dealing with this kind of problem. And it's just really interesting. It was a powerful experience.
That
Yeah.
is amazing. So I was just thinking, in terms of, Vajrayana and Dzogchen, uh, would you say that it would be fair to say that catharsis is related in some way to cessation of clingy, you know?
I do feel like, yeah, the surrender, there was some aspect of the surrender that was very powerful, right? And surrender in a safe space. And I guess that's what I think is unique about it. And I will say that when I did have this hypnosis experience, I was reminded of an experience I had had being guided by our teacher, Dr. Nina Chenaksong, in kind of a, simulation of a dream yoga type of experience, which was during our waking reality. So that was really the parallel I had in my mind. I think there is something about addiction that where you're setting up a battle, right? Like between your executive self and the rest of your body. And it really does create this grasping to the idea of the executive self. I used to smoke cigarettes too, right? Like I've experienced kind of these very kind of rigid, kind of, solid seeming feelings of craving, but the executive self is telling the rest of the body what to do. And then there's a battle. And I think what was effortless about this was, really destroying like the power of the executive self and bypassing the resistance, right? Like that you're experiencing, and realizing that in reality, like the holistic part of you that's below the executive self is healthy and is, healing oriented and does have intelligence and wisdom. And the executive self is really kind of this illusion of a boss, right? That we're privileging. And so that's, I guess, the message that I feel like is worth sharing, or, for me coming out of this experience is really this dissolution of this executive self, which is something you can read about and understand as a student of psychology, but you cannot truly experience until you do something like what I experienced in hypnotherapy, where I'm exploding it or something, right? Like you're kind of like destroying this mastery of this fake, authoritarian executive self. And I will say, like, I have a question for you also, which is, I feel like one of the reasons that there's skepticism about hypnosis in the Western community, or maybe in the community at large, is because it is effortless, right? And that there isn't this battle and there isn't this mastery, not always effortless, but that there can be like a more natural, effortless result, which can be quick and spontaneous, right? Which doesn't have to do so much with kind of like control, or it doesn't have to do so much with mastery, or kind of these pop psychology ideas of like Freudian unconscious, right? And I think what you were talking about at the beginning of this podcast is actually also really important, because these ideas about, serotonin and depression, these false ideas that trickle down into the public consciousness never really get refuted. And so I kind of think like these Freudian ideas, right, about this chaotic, ungovernable, selfish, kind of brutal unconscious is really powerful, and that people are still thinking in this dualistic way about the unconscious versus the conscious mind.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, even that there are distinct levels, right? And that we're not simultaneously, which, is, I understand the Dzogchen model of mind is that, when we're relating to the essence, then the base, then everything is present at once, whereas we have these sort of it's really only in treatment with ego state therapy or something like that, where you would have more than one person out at the same time,
right?
Unless that were already, dissociative disorders patient, maybe. But yeah, that's actually a really good point. And I really liked also your focus on executive ego, and in the way that we're experiencing cathartic experience. I think that's definitely one way we could understand like what it means to relinquish grasp. Like, who is relinquishing grasp?
Right, exactly. That's exactly it. It's like, who is it? Like, right, this phone grabbing person, right? Or like this, it's even just a loop. I mean, maybe it's even less, it's even more habitual, right? Like it's the executive self is just perceiving the loop and thinking the executive self is in charge of what's happening, or the arm reaching out, right, to touch the phone, right? There's so much going on just in that one act, like to reach out and touch the phone. And so that just kind of breaking through the illusion of choice, even that like there is an executive self that is telling your arm to reach out and touch the phone, is something that's powerful, I think.
Yeah, that is so true. And that's one thing that often I thought, like, uh, one thing phenomena that could really be used in pointing out instructions would be all kinds of these involuntary movement behaviors, like
Right,
hands coming together and this kind of stuff,
right.
or for that matter, auditory hallucinations and things. Now the voice of your guru is coming to you, and the screen opens up, and what is he saying? Actually, there is something like that already. It's in the Red Book, not Jung one, but the Milton, not
Uh-huh.
Milton Erickson one, the Big Hypnosis Red Book of all the hypnotic formulas published by Ash. And Corydon Hammond is the last editor of that, if I remember correctly. Uh, there is something called meeting your inner advisor, you know. Uh, yeah, it just seems like there's some benefit in looking at polypsychic nature. That is one thing that I find really annoying about mainstream clinical psychology and counseling is how needlessly illusory it is around the nature of identity. And so it's really like you're only trying to work with one part of the person.
Right,
And a lot of times the person who shows up to therapy isn't who needs the help.
right.
I
That's
have to like go in there and find out the part of the person that really needs the help. They
so
show up
true.
and they do all the homework and look, I haven't gotten better. And they did
Right.
every single thing and I haven't gotten better. And I was like, yeah, it's because we're doing full self therapy. You're the part of you that is suffering I have yet to meet.
Right. Right. No, that's true. I mean, and right. And I think you can reach that place ideally with talk therapy, but I do think that hypnotherapy provides a shortcut or something faster, right? And like in this world,
Yeah.
I feel like there's also an impatience, and whether that's good or bad is debatable, but like I do think there needs to be more speed, I guess, in the way that we're treating psychological issues, especially things like phone addiction that are so prevalent in people's lives. And that just as there's a resurgence of interest in psychedelic therapy, I do think there's a resurgence of interest or an acceptance of hypnosis because people also want results that are quicker. And like, that's just the reality, that's just the reality. Like there's, I think people have like a new speed that they're living life with, right? And that they're absorbing information with, that they're experiencing the world, and a sense of I don't know, I hesitate to say looming apocalypse, but there's definitely a lot of aspects of our society that are crashing down upon us, right? Like at this moment. And there's like a sense of needing to, like address like what's happening in your own life within this greater context, as you said, this kind of greater semi-dystopian, like socioeconomic situation that we're in. Yeah, so I think hypnosis is relevant in offering, a more effortless path to connect with the part of the self that needs healing, like which is basically what you just said, but just a different path to let that part of you out, right? And to do it in a safe way. And like you can't always do that with language and words, and with a even in a safe therapeutic relationship, it's going to take a lot longer to bring that part of yourself out. I feel that for myself, like with my experience. Yeah.
So thank you for answering that. Actually, where you just went is related to the other thing I wanted to ask you about, which is, so the person that I know that did the most research on this is Marty Sapp. Marty Sapp was really, I think he's still with us. Well, I think he retired from University of uh, Milwaukee, University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. And he did all this really great research, kind of looking at different cultural variables around using hypnosis. And one of the findings I remember from his research was that matching, really did help therapeutic relationships. And then in general, right, around race. And in general, that's the finding outside of hypnosis as well, So obviously having someone who's like you work with you, you get
Yeah.
them better, they get you better, this kind of thing. helps with rapport, and also honestly, the underlying research in empathy shows that um, we empathize more with people who are like us. So maybe even this is reflecting why I'm asking this question, actually. So I've often felt like because I've matched so few people's, like the only time I ever had the experience of being around people who looked like me was when I was in Colombo, Sri Lanka. Even going to Nepal and India, yes, I look similar, but I'm a certain kind of Eurasian. And at least to my eyes, I feel that mainly when I'm in Sri Lanka. And otherwise, I assume that to a certain extent, I don't look similar to other people. And then some people will conflate me with being Native American in particular here in Colorado.
Yeah.
They'll ask me what, even Native Americans will ask what tribe I'm from.
Mm-hmm.
And where I wanted to go with this is I've wondered if you ever thought that impacted, well, just as, you know, we said about Marty Sapp's stuff about hypnosis and clinical psychology, but ever wondered whether that might be affecting either your personal experience as hypnosis being multi or biracial, or do you think it might impact how clients would perceive you as a hypnotist?
I think it's a very, yeah, I definitely think it's impacted me for sure. Yeah. You know, I mean, so my ancestry is my mother's side is Japanese and my father's side is Irish, right? So I think there's also kind of a, you know, it's very rare to meet another Irish and Japanese person. Like, you know, there's
Yeah.
always a commonality with meeting other people that are Eurasian or biracial in general. And there's kind of a shared experience, I think, that links all people who are explicitly multicultural or multiracial, because I think really we're also just the poster children, right? Most people have complex cultural histories in reality, but I think explicitly biracial people are kind of carrying the water for the rest of society, right? By kind of occupying this liminal space, let's say, like between rigid categories. And I do think that's one of the reasons that probably potentially biracial or multiracial people are less dualistic or maybe attracted to like less dual philosophies, because there's a life experience that has occurred, right? Which is already kind of shattering rigid boundaries and kind of, you know, highlighting how dualism is harmful, right? It's harmful and it kind of can perpetuate very unequal and kind of inhumane relations between people, right? And then also coming from the background of like a loving, hopefully, like a, you know, in some cases, like a intimate relationship that's loving, you know, or seeing kind of like the potential for union, right, between different worlds or different worldviews or kind of different cultural traditions gives you a different place to practice from. And so I think on one hand, I do feel like a certain loneliness, right? Like as a biracial practitioner of psychotherapy, especially because there is a lot to be said for, I think, having a therapist that is, you know, has familiarity and experience with your cultural tradition. You know, I think there's a lot to be said for kind of matching, as you're saying, and not having to explain. And, you know, my psychotherapist is a multiracial person who practices specifically with people who are biracial and multiracial. So that has been a huge relief for me, you know, so I'm not going to say that it's not important. It is important. But I also think the non-dual perspective is to kind of see the individuality of each client and the universality of the struggles that we're experiencing, right? And kind of bridging this. So I think it's like holding this reality on one level, you know, kind of the, I guess, gross level, which is that there are a lot of experiences that are unique to biracial or multiracial people, especially in a country like America, which is a white supremacist nation that's founded on genocide, right? And where there's very kind of rigid and distinct values that are assigned to race, skin color, the way you look, how willing you are to fit into one of those categories, And that for biracial and multiracial people in America, there's a lot of pressure to pick a side or to pick some kind of identity that you're walking through the world in, right? And that's extremely psychologically harmful. So I think on one level, I'm trying to hold on to my biracial identity and accept that I need a space that's safe, especially in my own therapy, in my own therapeutic process with my therapist. But on the other hand, to feel that I can participate, with the greater community, and the diversity that is there, and to kind of, promote and increase the level to which BIPOC people, clients, therapists feel like they can be safe and included in this therapy of this psychotherapeutic world, which has been so white, at least in the Western tradition. And I guess the reason that the Eastern tradition and bringing this into my life and my study of Sowa Rigpa is important is because I want the Eastern and Asian parts of my cultural heritage to be represented in my work, and in my professional world, and to have that be explicit. And that's a relief, I guess.
Oh, that's really fascinating answer. I really feel a lot in common with that. Like I feel the difficulty in integrating dualistic racial identities has made me more open, I think, to other people who are given marginalized identities in particular. Like it's probably no accident that I, grew up with lots of people who are gay, bisexual, and lesbian and trans. Even though I'm straight, I feel like if you have something like this, then it tends to make one, yeah, no doubt, if you can't achieve the dualism,
Yeah,
right? Then you have to embrace the shadow or something. I don't
yeah,
know.
that's true.
The ambiguity, I guess,
Yeah,
not the
that's
shadow.
true.
Uh,
Yeah,
and I think that has actually opened, the empathy up, as you're saying, and compassion. First, that you needed to understand yourself, right?
right.
And then empathy flows outward that way. If you can understand yourself, a good chance you can understand at least the motives of people who are somewhat similar,
Yeah,
um, or have a similar theme like alienation, I guess. Uh, but the other side of this question I wanted to ask you too, which is, do you think this will have implications for how you will be uh, as a counselor, in terms of how people will perceive you as racially, or also as a woman, or any other social occasion? But in particular, I was thinking about, since we shared this one, uh,
Mhm.
I'm a Scottish and Sri Lankan, so also an interesting mix, But I have had experiences like this that made me think. But I'm curious to see what you would say. Like, do you think, either as a hypnotist, or I don't know, someone maybe teaching Dharma, or as a just counselor, even without hypnosis, how do you think this might play? You
Yeah.
being,
I think that I feel the need to be more explicit about my identity, right? Than maybe some people do, or some people feel the
yeah,
need to. I feel like I do need to let my identity be part of my professional face, and so that people can understand who they're working with, or who, potential clients can really see me for who I am, and not kind of make an assessment based on my appearance or my first and my last name. My middle name is Mariko. It's Japanese, but it's difficult to tell from my Julia Shannon, right? Like what my
yeah,
identity. So I think that I feel the need to be more explicit about my identity and kind of how that has shaped my understanding of structural influences on the psyche. Because ultimately for me, like, as you kind of were saying at the beginning of this conversation, I don't think it's possible to have like a totally intrapsychic approach to healing, because there are so many influences that are social, economic, hierarchical determinants of people's sense of self, their ability to be fully realized, and to feel comfortable and to feel loving towards the world, right? And to feel loved. So I think being explicit about that is helpful, number one. And number two, I feel like, being in this biracial position, which I do agree with you is some kind of shadow. I really think it's some kind of shadow place, like to sit in, like in this society. It really kind of gives you a heart-based awareness of how harmful like these boxes can be, and that the boxes can be on any category. They don't have to be racial, as you said. It could be about gender identity or sexuality or experiencing patriarchy. There's so many categories. And so I think when you have kind of like a heart-based experience of that, and you've worked yourself to kind of try to free yourself and to be more fluid, to kind of learn how to navigate this world, and to kind of retain your own self-respect and sense of self and sense of capability, that there can be a understanding with clients who are experiencing that in any aspect of their identity, right? And that's true, and the converse. I think you don't have to be a biracial or multiracial person to be working towards a more fluid way of living and a more a more free way of living, like in this very rigid, kind of very oppressive, hierarchical world that we live in. So I think like that feeling that there is like this very kind of important process of liberation that is about fluidity and is about feeling free in an unfree world and feeling free in your own mental and spiritual space, right? Like is probably at the foundation of how I would want to work with clients. And I don't know if practicing hypnosis would be a path for people to start to begin to experience some of those freeings from boundaries. But if it is, then I would definitely be interested, like in integrating that. And like Buddhist perspectives, as you're saying, like kind of bringing in, not blending it in a mishmash, but just kind of bringing in insights, right, from like these different traditions that can help us live in a more free way, in a more blissful way, more in touch with our organic intelligence, as we learn from like the great teachers. So
when I was I guess 21, I changed my name. Used to be Wick, or no, sorry, Wickram. And then my parents had shortened it from Wickramasekera to Wickram to maybe help that I could fit in better or something. But it just confused myself and everyone else more. And then I found out what Wickramasekera meant, and I was like, God damn it, it means something cool. It means the victorious one whose name is written in the sky.
Wow,
And
that's beautiful.
I was like, hey, there's something I like. And so as I, sort of came out as a Sri Lankan person in the closet Sri Lankan, then I put it back in, and I figured out how to do it and changed my name back. But I think that this issue of non-dualism that we were talking about earlier is really important here, and how we're creating and maintaining ourselves, both as a therapist or a hypnotist or, I don't know, teacher of Dharma. I think I remember one of these quotes. I remember Chogyam Rinpoche talks about what enlightenment is. And he talks about it being a teacher that is fully awake to who they are and 100% genuine. And so these kinds of issues, I think, they require like really, looking at our fixations on how we want to be.
Yeah.
And so if you have struggled, as I know I have, I feel like it has been very helpful to me to have had these struggles in terms of helping people, even who don't have, the struggle with race, but maybe the struggle with, internalized homophobia or something, or someone comes to me, having really struggled with patriarchy, woman comes to me this way, then I have at least that way of understanding hegemony through it's stamping its boot on my face,
Exactly.
And so I do think that brings more empathy, and also I think does make one probably to have a more hypnotic style as a therapist, whether you use hypnosis or not. I feel like, we're more attuned to the micro expressions.
That's true. And just the sense of the self, right? Like, I just think biracial or multicultural people really have like a lot that is underneath the executive exterior level. And, being really aware of that, like how much is under there, can help you kind of understand how that's probably true for everyone, right? Like, I just think we're more, or there just is something about our life experience that does make you just very conscious of this deep well, the deep well that is underneath, like, right, what is being shown to the world, and like how to use that in a healthy way, that it's not, as you said, kind of this site of, like repression. Yeah.
Now, it turns out that you're one of the few people in the world that I know that are into hypnosis enough, and also clearly are comfortable. I hope you're continue to be comfortable talking about this. But I just remembered that actually there's an aspect of hypnosis research that kind of plays into this, at least in my experience, and that's Ted Sarbin's role-taking theory of hypnosis. And so I don't know if you've had this experience, but in the multiracial, biracial literature, there is a sort of phenomenon people talk about when you're multi and biracial. People can have what's called a flexible look, And so I have to say that one of the things that really helped integrate my illusory self in a way that I didn't experience all this horrible social things. I used to have the worst social anxiety, ridiculous, lived in panic attack. But one of the things that did help integrate it was things like you were talking about, like signaling, what your middle name is in your case.
Right.
In my case, it was my last name.
Right.
But for me, one of them was growing my hair long.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather, our great-great-grandfather, had hair longer than me,
Wow.
and he was the Supreme Court justice in Sri Lanka. The other is, making the name longer, and I even sort of let go of. I used to want to speak in a particular way, so my voice has changed quite a bit since I not trying to hold this Midwestern
Right.
corn-fed boy accent, and I really let all my teachers' accents. In fact, now I speak in a very strange way with Tibetan and Bhutanese and Sri Lankan and rural Illinois. Everything are mixed in. I think, again, it's this construction of the self is when you're given these dichotomies, as you're saying, they're really impossible to bring together in cultural terms, in terms of even social cultural oppression. It does seem to lend itself towards I guess potentially becoming empathic or maybe psychotic on the other side. You can't hold enough together to develop empathy for anything. You just keep splitting. I don't know. Actually, I had some cousins that went that way, to be honest.
Right. 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 Well, I mean, yes, I think definitely like learning about, the prevalence of schizophrenia in communities of immigrants, and just like the challenges to the psyche that are occurring, right? And then kind of the building back and breaking down of the sense of self is something that's relevant. And I do think that what you're describing is like, yes, being kind of forced to kind of having this malleability that comes from having to signal certain things socially in service of kind of this white supremacist, system. Is something that is toxic. But when you start to use that in your own benefit, and to see the malleability like you're describing of kind of your voice or changing your hair, changing your presentation to the world, you start to use it in the other way, for yourself, right? And to kind of take the power that you have from kind of constantly having to code switch or whatever, present yourself or whatever situation you're in. When you start to turn that, for your own benefit, in your own healing and your own empowerment, that's, I think, and I'm experiencing the same thing as you, which I think is like a coming out process of some kind. But when you start to like leverage it for yourself, then it becomes dynamic. And then instead of becoming stifling, it's becoming freeing and it's becoming powerful, and that is healing, hopefully.
Yeah. So this really goes along with Ted Sarbin's role-taking theory of hypnosis, which is probably the most misunderstood theory of hypnosis, because the simplest way of saying it is that people fake hypnosis and hypnosis is real. And even Ted Barber used to fuck around in a way that made it sound like he believed that. But it's just really, he's more a trickster, I think. I don't think he really ever fully believed that. He did use the word hypnosis in quotation at one time. He stopped, I think, about 1970 something. But at any rate, this theory says something actually quite profound. I think it's a very empathic phenomenon, which is, like, for instance, like today, I'm here at Naropa, and so I've got my hair down. This university founded by hippies and really love and respect Asian wisdom traditions. It's one of the best reasons to be here, if at all, is really got to be that for me. I really enjoy one of the few places, really, where I'm not going to be fired for teaching meditation or hypnosis. They're fine with everything. So I think, like in Sarbin's role-taking theory was that people adopt to the experience of hypnosis that's been presented to them as being part of a hypnotic role. And then you live it out with what he called hallucinated intensity. And so when you're sort of talking about, this non-dualistic experience that you're forced to deal with when you are a blend of something that's ain't supposed to, even my parents actually couldn't get married in my home state. They had to go to a neighboring state to get married because of discrimination against, multiracial marriage, biracial marriage. So I think that maybe there's something about this need for having a stable role that creates this, what Sarbin called hallucinated intensity, so that we, try to create this sort of almost like Gestalt phenomenon. The original word Gestalt has to do with this, that you create an experience of a illusory whole. That's what a Gestalt is. It's like the first Gestalts were like people watching slides of movies and then inferring movement. Like if you watch a bunch of slides and if they're presented to you fast enough, it looks like a horse is going across the screen. But actually, all you saw were just a whole bunch of pictures of horse not moving. And so the Gestalt, that's what a Gestalt is. It's a kind of illusion of a whole and a continuity from, something that's more than the sum of its parts.
That makes sense.
And so, I love this because, of course, that's the Buddhist take on the self too, right? Is really no essence of the self. You can't read no body, no tongue, no appearance, no mind. And so I was just really thinking a lot about this hallucinated intensity that we need to feel that we are something. Like even both our families really arrange our names in a way that we would be more, I don't know, acceptable is the word, I hate to say.
Definitely.
And I think that has made it necessary, at least for me, sometimes to form this kind of hallucinations about who I myself is to make it more tolerable. And at times, they're totally selected things that were completely, they seemed true to me, but they resulted in all this floating anxiety from parts of me I was not in touch with.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I'm thinking, yeah, maybe there's something about this that, really this role-taking anxiety about being multiracial or biracial that could either increase one's empathy and thus hypnotic experience to engage in role-taking with hallucinated intensity, as Sarban used to say. And then also I've noticed it the other way. Like there are people who sometimes say to me that no one else has ever been able to hypnotize them. And I usually don't think this way about myself at all. Like I personally, when I look at the research on this, it's pretty damning to anybody who claims to have the secrets of hypnosis. Is complete bullshit. Most of the variance comes from the kind of person who has the ability. And if you are smart enough to have read the research about them, then you can help them. You got good enough training, then no one has no ridiculous, secrets of it. Sometimes people invent these expectancies that people then live out as part of it. But even that could be dismissed very easily if another person came on the scene. But every once in a while, there are people that do say this to me. And so mostly what I think at that point is they're feeling gratitude because I helped them. And so I'm trying to say, no, this was you. I was just your mirror. And that's how I actually think of it. I'm just a good coach. And you can say I'm a good coach, and that's fine. But really, the ability has always been yours. But then they'll just keep wanting to do that. Sometimes when people really do that, and then I ask, well, what was it about me then? And then sometimes they will say things like, your ideas are just so different, and so sometimes I wonder if not looking like other people actually puts me in different, like people are already having trouble categorizing me racially. Maybe that does give a small advantage where it's opening people's empathy. Like, what are you? I don't, actually people will say that to me. They will say, what are you?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, people have definitely said that to me. But I think you're right. There's something there's something unique about hypnotism and being a hypnotherapist where you're, even to a greater degree than in regular therapy, like your body, demeanor, right, presentation are playing an even greater role in the creation of expectancy, or the creation of a space that is different, right? A space that people can experience something different. So that is something that I think is interesting and worth discussing and worth studying, because the human aspect is even more heightened in the hypnotherapeutic relationship than in, I think maybe it's even more heightened in the hypnotherapeutic relationship than in the traditional talk therapy relationship. So yeah, it's something to explore for sure. But yeah, and I want to thank you so much, Dr. Ian, for all of your generosity and sharing with us, your thoughts today. I really appreciate it.
I very much appreciate, really, I could go on talking forever because really, even in your first statement, you said so many interesting things to me. And actually, as you can see, I went for the most personal of the things that you said. And so I really appreciate you being willing to offer your experience with them, because I know these were experiences that, attached to some degree of suffering, at least in myself, but also I feel very much uplifted by them. And I very much salute you for the way you're living your life. And if you wish, I hope you enjoy to bring out your middle name too.
Thank you.
I know for sure bringing back my long last name did actually help me integrate this illusory self until I can, I don't know, get rid of it altogether.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you. No, thank you for saying that. And I hope that, yes, I'd love to, continue to stay in touch and, maybe learn more about hypnosis from you.
So wonderful. I would enjoy that. Yeah, so wonderful.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Steve, for connecting us and allowing this conversation to take place.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Yeah, it was my pleasure, and so great to hear the two of you talk and dialogue like this. Thank you both so much. Dr. Ian and Julia Shannon, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.